I have lived beside this river for 40 years, and I know every sound it makes. I know the sound it makes in January, when the ice shifts and settles, a low grinding complaint that travels through the ground and up through the floorboards, into the soles of your feet, if you're standing still enough to feel it. I know the sound it makes in late summer, when the water drops and the exposed rocks begin to collect heat, and the whole river smells of warm stone and distance. I know the particular roar it makes in spring, when the snowmelt comes down from the high country all at once, reckless and indifferent, carrying with it everything the mountains have been holding since October. I know that sound better than almost anything. What I did not know, on the morning of the 14th of April, 1885, was the sound a person makes when the river has finished with them, and they are not entirely sure they wanted to be finished. It was that sound that brought me to the bank. The Yellowstone runs along the north edge of my property, 80 acres of Montana grass and creek bottom that my father broke in 1843, and that I have been tending ever since, with varying degrees of success and the particular stubbornness that comes from having nowhere else to be. I have run cattle here, and hay, and for a few years in the 60s attempted sheep, which I do not recommend. I have buried 2 dogs and 1 horse on the hill behind the barn, and my wife Clara on the same hill in the winter of 1872, which was 13 years ago now, and still the number I reach for first when someone asks how long I've been alone. 13 years. It sounds like a long time until you're inside it. Then it sounds like last Tuesday. I had been up since before light that April morning, as I generally am, checking the water line along the north pasture, where the flooding always threatens the fence posts first. The river was high, higher than I'd seen it in several years, the color of wet clay, moving with the specific purposeful violence of something that has decided it is going somewhere and does not intend to be redirected. I had lost 2 fence posts already and was considering a third when I heard it. Not a voice exactly, more the sound underneath a voice, the sound a person makes when they have been using up all their remaining resources on staying alive and have very little left for anything as optional as calling for help. I followed it 30 yards downstream. She was caught on the roots of a cottonwood that had half toppled into the river 2 years ago, and that I had been meaning to clear ever since. The roots had snagged her torn wool dress and held her against the current, the river pulling, the roots holding, and the woman somewhere between them doing what she could, which at that point was not much. I went in after her. The Yellowstone in April flood is not a river you enter casually. I entered it with the understanding that I was 62 years old and had no business doing so, and did it anyway because there was no one else, and the arithmetic was straightforward. I got a grip on her arm and got us both to the bank, and we lay there in the cold mud for a minute, both of us breathing in the way that means you are concentrating on breathing and not on anything else. Then she said, in a voice that was barely there, "Thank you." And I said, "Don't thank me yet. It's a long walk to the house." She almost laughed. I noticed that. She ran a fever for 3 days, which I had been expecting. I had some experience with fever. Clara had run several in the years before the end, and I had learned the particular discipline of sitting beside someone who is not entirely present, and simply being there for when they came back. I sat beside her. The second day she was awake enough to look at the ceiling and take water and say, "Where am I?" Ely Marsh's property, north bank of the Yellowstone, 12 miles east of Corwin Springs. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "How did I get here?" "I pulled you out of the river." Another pause. "Why?" she said, not ungratefully. Just honestly, I looked at her. It was the first time I'd looked at her properly. She'd been unconscious or fevered up to now. She was older than I'd first thought, not young, a woman who had been somewhere and done something with her time. Gray-green eyes that were, even in fever, observant. A scar along her jaw that was old and had healed clean and that I did not ask about. "Seemed like the thing to do," I said. She looked at the ceiling. "What's your name?" I said. June, she said. She said it the way you say something you're testing to see if it still fits. I'm Eli, I said. There's broth when you're ready. She was quiet for a while. Then she said, I don't have anywhere to go. I didn't say anything to that immediately. I looked at the wall, then I said, I'm not going anywhere either. She looked at me. I stood up and went to get the broth. She stayed because there was nowhere else to go, which was the practical reason. And it satisfied me as a reason, because I had learned at 62 not to look too hard at the underside of things that are working. By the end of the first week, she was up. By the end of the second, she was useful, which she seemed to need to be. She did not ask permission before she did things. She saw what needed doing and did it, quietly, and without making a performance of the effort. She found where I kept the mending and mended things. She organized the kitchen in a way that made considerably more sense than how I had been running it for 13 years. A fact I acknowledged to myself without mentioning to her. She did not talk about herself. This was not evasion, exactly. It was more the behavior of someone who has set something down temporarily and is not yet ready to pick it back up. I recognized it because I had done the same thing myself in the years right after Clara, when the past felt like a country I had emigrated from and was not sure I had the right to re-enter. So I did not ask. What we talked about was the land, the river, the cattle, the particular problems of the north fence line, and whether the cottonwood that had saved her life was going to take out the fence posts if I left it another season. She had opinions. They were good opinions, offered without apology, and then left alone, which was the right way to offer them. She knew things about cattle that surprised me. Where did you learn that? I asked once about something specific, the way she'd identified an early sign of illness in one of the younger steers, a thing most people would have missed. She looked at me. My husband ran cattle, she said. It was the first time she'd mentioned a husband. She said it with the particular flatness of something that has been handled so many times, it has worn smooth. I nodded. Said nothing. She went back to looking at the steer. I went back to the fence. Walt came by in May, as he generally did in May, to discuss the summer pasture rotation and drink my coffee and tell me things about the county that I hadn't asked to know. Walt was 55 and had been my nearest neighbor for 20 years. He knew me the way people know each other after that length of time, not completely, but in the way that counts, the parts that matter. He saw June immediately, of course. She was in the yard cutting back the winter-dead growth from the kitchen garden when he rode up, and he stopped his horse and looked at her, and then at me with the expression of a man reassessing several assumptions simultaneously. Walt, I said. June. Walt June nodded and went back to the garden. Walt dismounted and followed me to the porch and accepted his coffee and said nothing for a full 2 minutes, which was some kind of record. Then he said, River? April flood, I said. He drank his coffee. How long has she been here? Going on 6 weeks. He looked at the yard, where June was working with the easy efficiency of someone who had been doing this particular task for years. He looked at me. You look better, he said. I look the same, I said. He said nothing, which was his way of disagreeing without arguing about it. She staying? He said finally. I don't know, I said. That's her business, he nodded. Finished his coffee, stood up. I've known you since 65, Eli, he said. I watched you sit in that house for 13 years and call it enough. He put his cup on the rail. It was not enough. You just got stubborn about it. He got on his horse and rode back down to the river road. I stood on the porch and watched him go and thought that some people were very inconvenient to have known for 20 years. June found Clara's grave in June. I don't know when exactly. I came around the barn one evening, and she was standing on the hill, looking at the 3 markers there, the dogs, and the horse, and Clara. And she had her arms folded across her chest, and her face had the particular stillness of someone who is thinking something they haven't decided to say yet. I came and stood beside her. She said, "Clara, my wife," I said. 13 years ago. She was quiet. Then, I'm sorry, I looked at the marker. Clara Ruth Marsh, 1831, 1872. I had carved it myself in the winter after, and had not been entirely satisfied with the lettering on the R, which Clara would have found funny. She was a good woman. I said, direct, funnier than people expected. She could read the weather 3 days out, which sounds like a small thing, and is not a small thing. June almost smiled. What was his name? I said, your husband. A pause. Robert, she said. He died in 82. I'm sorry, I said. She looked at the markers. He wasn't a bad man, she said. That was the hard part. He wasn't bad. He just, she stopped, started again. He decided I was a thing that had happened to him, rather than a person he had chosen. And after a while I couldn't remember which one I was either. The evening light was on the hill. The river was audible below us, lower now in June, quieter. She said, I left in March. I was heading to my sister in Billings. The stage road was flooded, and I tried to cross the Yellowstone at the Corwin Ford, and the river had different plans, I said. She looked at me. Yes, she said. We stood on the hill for a while longer. The light moved. The river moved. The 3 markers stood as they always had, patient and specific. I'm glad the cottonwood held, I said finally. She was quiet for a moment. So am I, she said. She said it carefully, like someone testing whether the words were true, and finding that they were. It was Walt who said it plainly, because Walt was constitutionally unable to leave things unsaid that he felt needed saying. He came back in July with a broken harness that he claimed needed my opinion, and that I was fairly certain he had broken himself as a pretext. He sat on the porch and watched June working in the kitchen garden below and drank his coffee and said, You know she's not going to Billings. I said, that's her decision. He said, Eli, I have watched you be a reasonable man about unreasonable things for 20 years. Stop being reasonable about this one. I looked at the garden. She had a husband, I said. Had, Walt said. Past tense. It's not, I said and stopped. What? Walt said. I am 62 years old, I said. He looked at me with the expression he reserved for things he found professionally frustrating. She's not young either, he said. She's not a girl. She's a grown woman who's been through something and come out the other side of it. He put down his coffee, and she puts 2 cups on the table every morning. Did you think I hadn't noticed that? I had noticed that. The 2 cups on the table every morning. One for her, one set on my side before I came in from the morning chores. She had been doing it since the 3rd week. Neither of us had mentioned it. It was the kind of thing that accrues meaning precisely because it goes unremarked. Walt stood up. The river brought her here, he said. That doesn't happen twice. He left before I could find a reasonable response, which I suspected was intentional. I thought about it the way I thought about everything, slowly, from every angle, turning it over the way you turn a stone to see what's living underneath. I thought about Clara, not with guilt, but with honesty. Clara had been a woman of absolute practical wisdom who had told me more than once that the most expensive thing a man can do is refuse a good thing out of pride, dressed up as humility. Thought about 62 years, about the arithmetic of age and what it actually measured and what it did not. I thought about 2 cups on the table. I thought about the sound she had made when the river was finished with her. That sound underneath a voice, the sound of a person using the last of what they had, and the fact that she had something left. Even then, even at the end of it, she had something left. I went to find her on a Thursday evening in late July. She was at the riverbank. She went there sometimes in the evenings, which I had noticed and not commented on. She was sitting on the big flat rock above the waterline, watching the river, and the evening light was on the water and on her, and the Yellowstone was doing what it does in July, running clear and quick over the smooth stones, entirely different from the animal it had been in April. I sat beside her on the rock. We looked at the river for a while. Then I said, "June." She said, "Eli." "I have something to say," I said, "and I'd like to say it plainly." She looked at me with those gray-green eyes. "I'm 62 years old," I said. "I'm aware of what that means and what it doesn't. I have 80 acres and a bad fence line and a kitchen that you've organized considerably better than I managed in 13 years. I am not a man who has much to offer that isn't already visible." She was listening. "But I notice things," I said. "I noticed you in April, and I've been noticing you since. The way you work, the way you think, the way you set a cup on my side of the table every morning without making anything of it." I looked at the river. "I don't know what you're planning," I said. "I don't know if Billings is still where you're headed or if it isn't. But I'd like to ask before you decide whether you'd consider staying, not as a courtesy, not as an arrangement." I looked at her. "Because I'd like you to stay," I said. "That's the whole of it." The river went past us. A heron lifted from the far bank and crossed the water with the unhurried certainty of something that has been doing this for a very long time. June looked at the river for a long moment. Then she said, "I came out of the water in April, and I didn't know where I was or who I was going to be on the other side of it." She paused. "I know now," she said. She looked at me. "I'm not going to Billings, Eli. The evening held us both." "I think I knew," she said, "around the time I organized your kitchen." She looked at the river. "I just needed to know if you'd ask. Why didn't you say something?" I said. She looked at me with that expression, the one that had been reading things I hadn't meant to say out loud since April. "Because you needed to get there yourself," she said. "Some men do." I thought about Walt telling me to stop being reasonable. I thought about the 2 cups. I thought about 40 years of knowing every sound a river makes. I looked at her. "I'm slow," I said. She almost smiled. "You're careful," she said. "It's not the same thing." The river moved past us in the July evening, clear and unhurried, and the mountains held the last of the light on their high white peaks. And somewhere downstream a fish broke the surface once and was gone. I took her hand. She let me. We were married in October of 1885 in the Corwin Springs Church, with Walt as witness and the Reverend keeping it short because I had asked him to. June wore a dark green dress she had made herself, and she stood at the altar with the straight-backed composure of a woman who has made a decision she is entirely at peace with. Walt cried, which he denied afterward, and which I will take to my grave. She brought very little with her from her previous life. A few books, her mother's quilt, a small tin box she kept on the nightstand, whose contents she never explained, and that I never asked about. Some things belong to a person, and not to a marriage, and learning that distinction is part of the work. The kitchen remained organized according to her system, which was better than mine. The garden came back fully in the spring of 1886, fuller than it had been in years. She had a way with growing things, patient, observant, willing to let things develop in their own time rather than forcing them. I watched her work the garden that first spring and thought about the river in April, about the cottonwood roots and what they had held. Some things the river takes, some things it delivers. The distinction is not always clear in the moment. You only understand it afterward, standing on solid ground. On an August evening in our second year, we sat on the flat rock above the waterline. The Yellowstone was low and clear, and the evening was the kind that Montana produces in August, warm and golden and with a quality of light that makes everything look like it has always been exactly this way. She had her hand over, mine on the rock. "Do you ever think about that morning?" she said. "April, I think about it," I said. She looked at the river. "I wasn't," she said, and stopped. "I know," I said. She looked at me. "The cottonwood roots held," I said. She was quiet for a moment. "Yes," she said. They did. The river moved past us the way it had moved past this bank for as long as anyone could remember. Indifferent and faithful, carrying its freight of snowmelt and silt and whatever else the mountains gave it. South and east toward the Missouri, and then the Mississippi, and then the sea. It remembers everything, I said. The river. She looked at the water. Then I'm glad, she said quietly, that it remembered to bring me here. We sat on the rock until the light was gone, and the stars came out, and the river went dark and kept moving. As it always had, as it always would, some things you cannot stop. You can only be grateful they came your direction, and that in the end is enough.